This is Edenvale Aerodrome in Ontario. It's just off Highway 26 to the east of Stayner. During the war, the Canadian government committed to creating a system called the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan and train airmen, which was pilots, navigators, gunners, and wireless operators. So they created almost 200 fields across Canada very quickly between 1939 and 1941 and put that training plan into effect. Edenvale was a satellite field from Borden, base Borden, and there was another satellite field at Alliston. Base Borden was a Royal Air Force base during the First War, where they did training and so on, but when the Canadian Air Force was constituted in 1924, it became an RCAF base. This was a satellite base. It had aircraft called Harvards, which were an advanced training plane. The airplane behind me is a primary trainer, and then you went on to an advanced trainer, and then you went on to fighters or bombers after that. So this airport was abandoned after the war. It was used for car racing, motorcycle racing, and over in the field there is a lump covered in grass. That was a Cold War nuclear bunker. And when I first saw this airport in the late 60s, there was a big radio tower on that. That was where the important people from Borden were supposed to go if a nuclear war broke out. So that's the history. The owner of the airport, Milan Krupa, learned to fly, and one day he was flying in this area, saw this abandoned airport and said, "Who owns that?" and ended up owning it, and he has done a lot since. None of these buildings here, except for the old farmhouse over there, were there at the time. That was the officers' mess, and there was hangars, barracks, a mess, and water treatment and everything over there. After the war, when these airfields were no longer needed, a lot of them, the buildings were sold off to municipalities, the buildings and equipment. So it lay dormant for many, many years till it was revitalized 20-odd years ago. The Edenvale Classic Aircraft Foundation was built around initially an airplane that's behind me, which is a 1943 Tiger Moth. A group of enthusiasts got this aircraft, created a nonprofit so they could operate this and preserve this airplane and use it to show the public what was done back in the day. The Tiger Moth that we have here is a 1943 example of a 1931 design that was designed as a Royal Air Force trainer. And our particular airplane is exactly as it was in 1943. In those days, they only had grass fields, so it has no brakes. It has a steel tail skid, so we only operate on grass. So you can steer and stop on grass. The airplane itself was built by Morris Motors because by 1943 de Havilland was building Mosquito bombers, as was de Havilland in Canada. The Canadians built another version of this that had a canopy and heater and brakes and all kinds of improvements. But by this time in the war, they were wanting to change generations. So these airplanes stopped being made in 1944. They'd built over 7,000 and didn't need any more. And then they moved on to another aircraft, which we also have, a 1937 design called a PT-26, Cornell. And it was built in Canada by Fleet Aircraft in Fort Erie. We have another aircraft, a 1946 design, a Fleet Canuck, built by the same company as our Cornell. And we use it for familiarizing more modern pilots with the older technology, the tail wheels and so on. All airplanes fly the same, from the smallest single-seater up to the biggest A380, but there are some differences in the way you handle the airplanes. So we have these airplanes to preserve and present to the public. You can join us, help us look after these airplanes, or you can organize and take a flight in the airplanes. There is a saying that those who forget history are condemned to repeat it, although while that's not quite as apparent for the airplanes. The point being, there was a lot of technology and a lot done by our ancestors, and it's important to remember that. So there's a long, long history of aviation all over the world. Remember, the Wright brothers first flew in 1903, so aviation is 121 years old today. So for many, many years, what was once the Collingwood Classic Aircraft Foundation has moved to Edenvale, is now the Edenvale Classic Aircraft Foundation, has held an event with old airplanes, old cars, and old motorcycles called Gathering of the Classics, where a lot of airplanes gather, a lot of old cars gather, and some old motorcycles, and you can come and see them and maybe even take a flight in some of the classics, including our airplanes and Harvard's from the Harvard Association and even some others. I think we even have helicopter flights generally. So that would be on site August 10th at Edenvale Airport. If it happens to rain that day, it'll be August 11th. It's always the second weekend in August. So come on out and see the amazing things that we have to present to you.